How's it going, my RWBY friends? Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in. In this video, we will be discussing Volume 6, Chapter 8, and breaking it down, talking about some of the new theories that are onto the table and all that jazz. So if you don't want to get spoiled, I would suggest not watching this video. But before you go, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, by the way. And before we get into the actual review, I just want to mention that we're not going to have a new chapter of RWBY next week, guys. We will be on a mini one-week hiatus for the Christmas holiday break. So keep that in mind. There will be no new chapter next week, and it will be continuing the week after. Now, that's bad news, but it's also good news. I like to personally look at the mini breaks in terms of anime seasons more as good news because it extends the length of that season by a week. So, you know, it's always worse to be on the actual hiatus where we wait like eight or more months for the new volume. I don't mind a 1 week break that much. It lets the community still talk about stuff and just have a little breather from all the craziness that's been going on during the volume. So in my opinion, a 1 week break is just that. It's more of a break, kind of a chill out week where you just talk with the fandom and stuff like that, as opposed to the actual 8-month hiatus, which it just freaking just sucks. That very much always sucks when you're on the actual hiatus. But that's just my opinion, guys. And hopefully for some people that were depressed about the 1 week break, maybe that inspired you to look at it from a different way. With that said, let's get into the actual breakdown of Volume 6, Chapter 8, starting with the RWBY Rewind scene. So we had already seen this scene if you watched RWBY Rewind. Well, not the full scene. We saw about 30 seconds of it or so, give or take. So the main theory here was that potentially we would see Winter Schnee when the two guards got the commanding officer. Turns out it wasn't Winter Schnee. It wasn't the more crackpot theory ideas, which was Neon Cat or Glinda. It wasn't any of those people. But it was a new character named Caroline Cordova, a staunch, short, old lady Atlas officer, special ops. Like, Atlas always has funny names for their people. Like, they're so strict and all that, you know. Special operative, commanding officer Caroline Cordova. Because they literally called her special operative and then also a commanding officer. So, all right. Now, I gotta admit, the conversation was actually going pretty well when it was just Maria and Caroline. And we know that Caroline had let Maria go to Atlas before, so they give each other a hard time, but they're kind of like friends. Actually, this is kind of awkward, but my dad is up there in age, let me just put it that way. And him and another one of his friends are just like this. Now, the friend, to give credit to my dad's friend, he's not as old. But I've seen this dynamic in real life where you have the two friends that have known each other for years and years really giving each other a hard time. Like, they will just insult each other left and right. It's the funniest thing. And that's exactly what went down here with Maria and Cordovan. I would say the conversation was actually going well until RWBY butted in, honestly. They were throwing insults at each other, but it was in a friendly manner. And then RWBY got in, taking it too serious. She cut Maria off. And after RWBY intruded, other people intruded. For example, Cordovan lost her train of thought being directed on Maria. She noticed Junior in the back, was like, why are you guys still here? Nora starts yelling at him. Basically, the whole conversation devolved. Honestly, if RWBY didn't get involved, maybe Maria would have succeeded in talking her into letting everyone in. Honestly, it might have. This was a situation where RWBY getting involved didn't help. Usually it does help. For example, on the train going towards Argus, when RWBY got involved with Qrow, when he was holding up that other huntsman, the Dudley dude, I forget if it was D or Dudley, I forget which one. And you know, it was basically good cop, bad cop. Qrow was like being all threatening, getting a little physical with him, and the dude even just had his arm almost torn off already. And then RWBY stepped in, like touched Crow's shoulder. Qrow backed off. RWBY was much nicer, and that approach worked. A lot of the time when RWBY gets involved, it does end up working out. This was a case where I don't think it did. There was a good showing of faunus racism in this scene as well. It was interesting how Cordovan calls out Blake. So she says, you also have some questionable friends. And then she looks literally at Blake. Keep in mind, Blake didn't say anything during this whole scene. Literally, Blake said nothing. Cordovan could have said questionable to any other characters there. Maybe Qrow for being the middle-aged dude hanging out with a bunch of teenagers. A little questionable. Maybe Team Junior in the back who has Nora yelling at them and they're holding Nora back. Nora's pretty questionable, right? Instead, she singles out Blake, who has said nothing just because she has cat ears. So good showing of faunus racism there. It's also interesting to take note that Weiss's disappearance is public information now. So Jacques made it public. Interesting. I really don't think Jacques cares that much, but maybe he cares more than I think. I don't know. At this point, Weiss was already no longer the heiress. He had already let Jacques down. And there's the sub notification. Sorry about that, guys. Good time for a sip of coffee. You You guys know why I have that on. It's an excuse to get a sip of coffee. I could always use an excuse for that. All right. So, on the topic of drinking, Qrow goes for a drink at the end of the segment. Very typical. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who did this. When I was watching this video, you'll see my reaction. Literally, as soon as Qrow started walking away, I'm like, oh, he's going to get a drink. RWBY runs up to him. She's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm getting a drink. Literally just like Volume 5 in the Haven scene. Like Volume 5, Chapter 1. Or was it Chapter 2? I think it was Chapter 1. Yeah, pretty sure it was Chapter 1. So after they meet Leo and the conversation goes horribly and they're all leaving, Qrow goes his own way. He's like, I need a drink after this. Same thing. Of course, this volume has painted Qrow's drinking in a much darker light. It's mostly been comedic relief before. This volume, it's been a little bit more, well, the more realistic approach, where it's really not good to be an alcoholic, like real life. And we see RWBY's concerned about that. And then the scene cuts. But let's take note that Qrow is alone drinking. He's not with the rest of the gang. With that note in mind, let's go to the next scene where they are back at Saffron's home. And what a good way to appreciate her putting y'all up than to punch a hole in her wall, Jean. That's a great way of showing your appreciation to your sister we haven't seen for a long time. I'm sure she's going to be very happy about that. So Jean is angsty as ever, guys. Angsty as ever. Punches a hole, saying that everything they did was all for nothing. Which is absolutely not true. If it was all for nothing, the whole world would be overrun by Grimm right now. There would be no civilization. There would be no towns like Argus where there's relative peace. So absolutely, huntsmen are doing... most huntsmen are benefiting the world. Now, keep in mind, there are some huntsmen that do shady stuff, like end up taking contract jobs or, you know, shady things like that. But that just goes to show how freedom of choice is really a thing in Remnant. You can go to an academy. You can learn how to use your semblance. You can even make a weapon. You can even get training all for free. Especially making a weapon. Those things, you've seen how crazy the weapons are in RWBY. I'm sure those things are expensive. They let you make it for free at an academy. And when you graduate, you're still free to do whatever you want. You literally are free to do whatever you want. It's a very free society that they live in. So, absolutely, the huntsmen that are doing good things, like team, let's just say Juniper and RWBY and all these other estimable huntsmen, are doing good things in the world, Qrow included. So when Jean says it's all for nothing, people get upset with that. And indeed, Blake got upset with that here. She looks over to Jean and says it's not all for nothing. That's not true. And she's right. Absolutely, it's not true. And Blake is a perfect person to say this because she knows what it's like to stand up for a cause. And she knows what it's like to see that cause get taken for a loop and deteriorate into something that it wasn't originally for. Jean originally wanted to become a huntsman to help people. And he is helping people. Him getting mad, saying it's all for nothing, is not fair. And I'm glad that Blake called him out on that. This is a situation that we have with Jean continually going more and more on a downward slope, where he's holding resentment towards himself for what happened to Pyrrha. He is definitely resentful in that situation because he didn't acknowledge Pyrrha's advances to him. There's scenes where literally Pyrrha's hitting on him and he just brushes her off. Literally, he like almost pushed her away too. And then he starts hitting on Weiss. And there's other times as well where he didn't treat Pyrrha well at all. But that was kind of like one of the worst scenes he had of mistreating Pyrrha, in my opinion. So I like to cite that example a lot just as proof. But there are other examples as well, just lesser extents. So I think Jean personally doesn't like how he treated Pyrrha. And when he finally started to appreciate Pyrrha, she ended up getting wiped out. And then he didn't really appreciate her at all up until she was wiped out. Like, even near the end, like one of the last scenes we had of Jean and Pyrrha, when Jean was trying to comfort Pyrrha, and they were even holding hands a little bit, he still was very disconnected to her feelings. Now, to be fair to Jean, he didn't have the full story of what was going on in Pyrrha's mind. But the fact is, even in that scene, he didn't... I don't want to say he didn't treat her well, because he did treat her well with like the most of the knowledge that he had. But it still didn't go very well, right? And then he's only really appreciated her once she kissed him. Like, that's very... It's such like a thuggish mentality, right? Such a basic mentality. And then again, he only really appreciated her once she was gone and he no longer had her. So he holds a lot of resentment in himself for the way he treated Pyrrha all this time at the school, at Beacon. And then instead of owning up to this, instead of owning up to the fact that he treated Pyrrha bad, if he owned up to that and he accepted that fact, it would help his relationships. It would help his current relationships. He would understand, okay, I need to, I didn't do Pyrrha right. It's true. I didn't do Pyrrha right. but I can try to make up for that with the relationships that I currently have going on. And the problem with Jean is instead of owning up to that fact, he would rather blame Ozpin or blame Qrow or blame any of the authority members and just peg the blame on them and say everything's all for nothing. You guys did this to Pyrrha. You guys brought us down this path. He needs to just own up to it, and that will help him, and that will help his team, and that will help all the relationships that he's in. With that said, let's continue on. I don't like talking about Jean that much, honestly. But there's actually more to talk about even. He ends up going and pressing Oscar, pushes him against the wall, and he's sounding honestly pretty paranoid. He's like, how do we even know it's you? How do we know it's not Ozpin? How do we know that you're telling the truth? How do we know you're not Ozpin this whole time? Like, he's freaking out, literally sounding paranoid. And the fact is, Ozpin hasn't done anything very bad to them. As a matter of fact, like I mentioned, only because of Ozpin are the Huntsman Academies even a thing where people can get training to defend themselves. They can get a weapon for free. They can get free education. They can arm themselves for free, like I said, with a weapon, learn how to, for free, get their superpowers unlocked, their semblance, their aura, and then they can pursue any career they want. This is all because of Ozpin. Also, he stopped the Great War right before he made those academies, so he literally stopped the world from destroying itself because these kingdoms were already having mass loss of life, coupled with the fact that the Grimm were also increasing in numbers due to all of this negativity. The world was literally about to end, and Ozpin saved the world, made the academies, give people ways of bettering themselves and pursuing any sort of life that they want, all because Ozpin did this for humanity. So Jean needs to get a grip, he needs to calm down, and he needs to understand where Oz is coming from. It is weird that these characters continually take, and Jean's not the only one at fault for this, out of the entire story with Ozpin and the gods and magic and humanity being wiped out and the moon being destroyed and magic being real and Ozpin, they saw Ozpin's family get killed. They saw Salem kill him. They saw his daughters probably get killed. Like, all this horrible stuff happened to Ozpin, and the only thing some of these characters take out of it is, oh, Oz lied to us a bit. And honestly, he didn't even lie that much. Whenever I get into debate with people about this topic, I will ask them, okay, what did Ozpin lie about? They usually, because they always say this. These people will always say this. Ozpin lies about everything. And then I'll counter by saying, okay, give me an example of what Ozpin lies about if he lies about everything. They usually give 1 or 2 examples, maybe 3 tops. I'm like, okay, well, that's literally only 3 things out of everything he's done. That's a very small sample size. He clearly does not lie about everything. And you also have to take note that when he does lie, more recently a team, RWBY & Co., let's just call it that for now. Like, it's always complicated to say, like, RWBY and Ranger, but the J is not really, the R is only one. Like, you guys know what I mean. Let's just say RWBY & Co. Can you really blame him for lying to some of these people? He barely knows Blake. He barely knows Weiss. He even knows Ren, Nora, and Jean to a lesser extent than Blake and Weiss. Sure, he knows Ruby and Yang, but that's through a loose connection with their relatives. He doesn't really know them personally. Keep in mind, Jean is someone who cheated to get into Beacon. He's not very trustworthy. Nora is the biggest loudmouth out of the whole gang. She's not very trustworthy to keep a secret. Ren is trustworthy, but that's one person out of the group of 3, and we know that Ren's pretty trustworthy, but Ozpin doesn't know that. Then you have Weiss Schnee. If she ends up telling Winter the secret or anything like that, even Winter's not even a part of Ozpin's cabal, and I'm sure Oz has more trust for Winter than Weiss. Not necessarily, like, let me clarify that, because Winter is working for Ironwood, so Oz would be a little sus of Winter as well. There's a reason Winter's not a part of the cabal, but I'm saying at least Winter is able to take orders and stuff like that. He knows more about Winter than he knows about Weiss, so of course he wouldn't really trust Weiss yet. He wouldn't trust Blake yet because he barely knows her. And then Qrow's there. He doesn't even really trust Qrow that much because in Volume 3 we were told that Ozpin and his associates thought that Qrow was compromised. Qrow is also a drunk. It's reasonable that Ozpin doesn't even trust Qrow that much, and Qrow is one of the people closest to Ozpin. So if he doesn't even trust Qrow fully, how can you expect him to trust a bunch of teenagers that he just met, some of who have cheated to get into school, some of who have a huge loudmouth, some of who have huge connections, who if they spilled that secret intentionally or accidentally, it would get spread like wildfire. Weiss connections with Jacques. Jacques could easily spread that information if he wanted to. Any sort of leak from some of these people, Blake, whose father's a chieftain and whose family is like royalty in a way, that could be a huge leak. It's just there's so many issues with Ozpin trusting them right away that it would have made less sense if he did trust them right away, honestly. So that I'm glad that he hasn't, because it would have made him look like very much a fool. So why not, have them get to Argus first and then see how things go, and then maybe he trusts them more. Trust something that's earned, especially with secrets that can destroy the entire world. Okay, with that said, guys, let's continue on from the Jean and Oscar scene. By the way, I do want to say I think Oscar could whip Jean's ASS. I'm just saying. Uh, so, so going to the outside scene now. RWBY exits the house, tries to call up Qrow, who looks beautiful in that picture, by the way, and he's not answering. So keep in mind, we find out later that Oscar is missing. We also know that Qrow went to get a drink, and he's not like missing, but he's not answering his scroll right now. Perhaps Oscar and Qrow are actually fighting Cinder and Neo right now. That would be crazy, and I would be really scared because Cinder and Neo are no joke, and Osman's probably not getting involved yet. So it would be Qrow and Oscar against Cinder and Neo, and that would not go well unless Neo betrayed Cinder in that moment. But I'm very worried, guys. Keep in mind we're on a hiatus right now. As I said in the beginning of the video, a 1 week little mini break. So that worry is only going to fester more and more over the next 2 weeks. The fact that possibly we're having Cinder and Neo fighting Oscar and Qrow right now. Oh, man. And between you and me, guys, I think Qrow is a little bit washed up. Let me put it like this. I think I think a younger Qrow would have done much better in many of these fights that he's been in recently than the current Qrow. Current Qrow is still very powerful and skilled, but he's definitely not in his prime anymore. I think that's pretty evident with some of his recent fights against Hazel, which we have to make the headcanon that he's still affected by Tyrion's venom. That's why he performs so badly. But that's literally relying on headcanon, which is a horrible thing to do. But because it's Qrow, I'm gonna give it a pass. But more recently, he also fought that Manticore Grim or the Sphinx Grim, whatever the big one was, and he didn't really do much damage to it by himself, and it ended up actually knocking him back. He fell on his back, and actually I think dropped his sword as well. Didn't go too far, luckily, but that didn't look good. Didn't even notice the Apathy Grim. That we give another pass for, though, because he was affected by the apathy and he was also drunk, so it's not really his fault. But all in all, it's, Qrow's showings recently have not been that great. So I think he's definitely out of his prime, but we'll see. And just to clarify, even his fight against Tyrion, but again, we can, like, a lot of his fights recently, though, we can make excuses for him. Like Tyrion, he didn't want to use the semblance to its full extent because RWBY was there and the rest of the gang was there. And we do know that he can control his semblance to an extent because this was confirmed. That I forget if it was confirmed during a rewind of some Q&A or something. But Qrow, I think it was rewind from last volume, if I recall. But if Qrow really focuses, he can increase the probability of misfortune happening to those around him. Even if he doesn't want it to happen, though, he will still always have like minor misfortune going around him. But if he concentrates, he can increase the probability and the extent of which misfortune will happen. So he had to limit his semblance, limit the misfortune in his fight with Tyrion because he didn't want it to affect RWBY and co. So we can make excuses for Qrow, but I do think it's also safe to say he's probably not in his prime anymore either. Especially with a lot of the missions he was been going on before, like the start of the show. A lot of the missions have just been like intelligence gathering, flying around as a bird, checking up on the maidens and stuff like that. It hasn't really been like fighting directly. It's more so been he was eyes and ears for Ozpin, literally one of Odin's birds. That's the reference. Okay, so that's interesting. RWBY throws the phone, having a similar outburst to Jean and Yang. It seems like their outbursts are getting the better of RWBY, although Jean and Yang have no issue making an emotional outburst in front of everybody, making a big scene and drawing a bunch of attention and all that. RWBY still seemed like, though she had a little bit of an outburst, she did it in private. She didn't think anyone was listening or watching. She didn't see Marie outside. She went outside. The rest of the gang was inside as far as she knew, except Qrow, because he went off drinking. So she got frustrated and threw the phone. But I think it's an interesting showing of character that her outburst was in private as opposed to characters like Jean and Yang who have done it in public. Big difference there, and I think that's something cool to take note of. Moving on to the Silvereye talk. So we get a lot of explanation here on the Silvereye powers. Now, a lot of this is fan theories that we've talked about, but it's always interesting and good to get confirmation on these theories in the show. So they're no longer theories, they're confirmed. So I found it interesting how in this talk, RWBY says the Silvereye warriors are legendary warriors when Maria asked her what she knows about the Silvereyes. So she doesn't mention the specific part that Silvereye warriors, because all she knows really is what Qrow told her. And what Qrow told her was Silvereye warriors are legendary warriors who have known to strike fear in the hearts of Grimm. Something like that. Grimm don't have hearts, but this is something he said, He specifically said that they counter Grimm. So it's interesting how RWBY says just that they're legendary warriors, and she doesn't bring up that they specifically counter Grimm. I wonder why they wrote it like that. It's kind of interesting. Then we get some more info from Maria. She learned about her Silvereyes from her father, and even he did not have many answers. I think it was wonderful writing in this part, though, where RWBY asks Maria if her father was a huntsman. And Maria says it wasn't an official title back then. This is an amazing writing to me, because those of us who actually like really pay attention to the timeline of events in the show totally understood what happened in this moment. The fact is, the Great War was 80 to 100 years ago, and after the Great War is when the academies were made. So the academies were not around really when her father was doing huntsman things like killing Grimm. It wasn't a huntsman thing because there was no academies at the time. There was no huntsmen or huntresses. So like Maria says here, it wasn't an official title back then. So I love that line. That was awesome. It's also interesting how she says eyes shone like mirrors reflecting the light of the world into darkness. It reminds me of that one song. I forget if it's Divide. I should have done research on this before I made my video. I apologize. I did do some research into the things I want to talk about, but I forgot to do this one, I admit. But one of the theories we had about that song specifically, whichever song it is that mentions the mirrors, it was either Silver Eyes because it's kind of mirror-like, or it was referencing Raven and Qrow because their emblems actually look like mirrors and they mirror each other. They're the same emblem but swapped. They're backwards. So this kind of more so points to the theory about them being Silver Eyes. Now we also get confirmation that Salem has been hunting down silver-eyed warriors for over 100 years now. She's probably been hunting them down as soon as she found out about him. Which is interesting because we don't know when the Silver-Eyed Warriors were exactly created. If they were around before the wipe of humanity or after the wipe of humanity, we really don't know. But the point is, we do know she's been hunting them down for over 100 years, at least, and we can reasonably assume it's well over 100 years, probably hundreds of years, if not over 1,000 years plus. So that makes me wonder. Someone who's always stood up for Ozpin, but I'm not biased, guys. I stand up for Ozpin because it seems logical for me to understand his position, and I get where he's coming from, and even on an emotional level I can empathize with the struggles that he goes through. But even me, I can of course also see flaws in Ozpin as well. I personally wouldn't trust Ozpin, but that's not the flaw I'm talking about right now. The flaw I'm talking about is if Silver-Eyed Warriors are so powerful against the Grimm and they've been being hunted down for hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more years, why was Oz not doing more to protect Silver-Eyed Warriors? We know that he does a lot to protect the Maiden Powers, and even that he's failed to do very well. But why hasn't he done more to protect the Silver-Eyed Warriors as well? That is weird to me. And that's a whole topic for another video. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on that right now because it would just take forever. I could literally make a whole separate 30-minute video on the topic. So just keep that in mind, guys. Why hasn't Oz done more to protect Silver-Eyed Warriors? It seems like something that he probably should have done. But let's move on for now. So Maria then says, I owe my life to my training and my semblance. At the end of the day, those are still your most powerful tools. Love that line, but at the same time, I hate it. I love it because it's true. You shouldn't rely on your Silver Eyes to get the job done. But I hate it because last chapter, my complaint with the fight from last chapter was literally that she had to rely on her Silver Eyes to get the job done. We saw her do all this amazing, awesome stuff with her weapons, with Dust, with her fighting skills, and now we know with her semblance. But then in the end, it literally did nothing. The Nevermore seemed like it was uninjured, and she had to use her Silver Eyes to wipe it out. So I just feel like this line is so good and true. But because of the way the fight went down last time, it's just, again, it makes it feel like it's irrelevant. Like, I love Maria. I love the fighting choreography was amazing last fight. But the way it went down where she had to rely on the Silver Eyes to beat that Nevermore after doing all that cool stuff to it, it's like, for those of you who watch Dragon Ball Z, it's like when someone would turn Super Saiyan in like the later or the middle volumes in DBZ, they'd turn Super Saiyan. It's freaking awesome. They do a lot of cool moves, and then the enemy would just be standing there like, huh, is that the best you got? Like, it just disappoints you, you know? But that DBZ reference isn't even as good because it's more disappointing in RWBY because we've never seen Maria fight before, and because we know she's supposed to be this legendary warrior, and we see how awesome her fighting is, and then we get cucked because it didn't do jack shit. And that's why I'm salty about that, because I love Maria, I love the Grim Reaper, I love everything about her design and her fighting style and her weapons, and everything is awesome. And then it's not awesome because it doesn't do anything. So it's like, I love it and I hate it at the same time. It feels bad, man. So her semblance is confirmed. Basically her semblance is a spidey sense. She can kind of feel movements and that sort of thing and react to them quickly. Very cool stuff. And a little thing I took note of, which I thought was awesome, is when Maria is asking RWBY specifically, I probably look so weird right there. I'm like, oh, wait a second. When Maria is asking RWBY what she remembers happen when she uses her Silver Eyes, the red like roses song plays, but it's like a new remix. It's like slower. So keep that in mind, guys. If you want to go back and hear that, it's pretty sick. It's the same scene with Maria and Ruby in the garden. Right when Maria asked Ruby what happened every time she used her silver eyes, there's a cool Red Like Roses remix that plays in the background. Definitely worth checking out if you didn't pick up on that. And then Maria says the desire to preserve life fuels the light inside her. Preservation is the extension of creation, or at the very least an enemy of destruction. Grim made by the god of light, silver eyes come from the god of light. I'm sorry, Grim made from the god of destruction, god of darkness, silver eyes come from the god of light. Maria realized this during Jin's vision scene, showing the god of light wipe out the Grim with the light, and then he had silver eyes. So Maria kind of pieced this together then. Some people were theorizing on this already. Rose, I know you were. And it's a good theory, and it's confirmed now, so that's cool. Although, really, it's interesting that our confirmation is a theory of a character in the show. You know, this is Maria saying that it went down like this. It's basically a theory that Maria has. This is pretty much confirmation, though, in terms of us being a viewer, so I'll take it for what it is, I guess. So that's interesting. And like I said earlier in this review, if the Silver Eye powers are passed down through generations, how did they even start? If they came from the god of light and then are a genealogical thing that's passed down, the trait is passed down through generations, did it exist before the wipe of humanity? And if it existed only after the wipe of humanity, or really doesn't even matter, after humanity was wiped out, how did this become a thing again? The gods at that point had left remnant, so how did that happen? I don't really understand. Hopefully they expand on that more. I feel like this is the case where a lot of the questions that we have answered is leading to more questions, but it almost feels intentional by the writing at this point. Like, they are answering things in very vague ways, or only answering half of the questions that we have, really. So it just brings more questions, guys. It really does. And we're getting near the end of the review now. So Ruby mentions how the Silver Eyes affected Cinder. Maria spawns, interesting. Perhaps there was something you just weren't seeing, implying that it was due to her Grim parts, because Ruby and Co. don't know that Cinder's part Grim. That's right. They don't know that. So that would make sense. To me, this still points to the fact that Silver Eyes only affect Grim. There's two types of people in the world, guys. The type of people that believe the Silver Eyes affect maidens in Grim or magic in Grim, and the type of people that think that the Silver Eyes only affect Grim. Honestly, while there's no definitive answer yet in the show, most of the information we have points to it only affecting Grim. Most of that information being Qrow's story. Now, consider that Qrow is only one source, and he might not know the full scoop, but still, Qrow said that the Silver Eyes are specifically a trait from legendary warriors that counter Grim, and that they specifically counter Grim. Grim fears Silver-Eyed warriors. He didn't mention anything about it affecting magic or maidens. Then you have the Salem Scene. This is where people got confused. Salem says that the reason why Cinder lost Ruby is because her gift has a crippling weakness. So a lot of people assume that gift was the maiden powers, but that gift could actually be the Grim, which helped her get the maiden powers. The Grim parasite that she absorbed and became one with. That is the gift. That gift, because Salem is so self-centered, she's referring to the gift as the parasite, which helped her get the maiden powers. So the gift is not the maiden powers. The gift is Salem's gift of Grim to Cinder. First the parasite, and then the Grim arm. Anyways, we're about done with this review, guys. The final thing is Oscar goes missing, but we already talked about that. Potentially, wow, I really can't talk right now. Potentially, Qrow and Oscar are going to be fighting Neo and Cinder, or somehow, Qrow and Oscar are going to find each other, and Neo and Cinder might be out there somewhere as well. So, it's interesting, man. This is the 2-week cliffhanger bait that we're on. What's happening to Oscar? Is he abducted? Neo and Cinder, are they there? Is Qrow not answering because he's in the middle of a fight? All these kind of questions is what we're wondering, guys. So leave me your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this chapter, and specifically this cliffhanger. Would you think that Qrow and Oscar are fighting Neo and Cinder? Who do you think would win? Do you think Neo would backstab Cinder before, hypothetically, Qrow or Oscar got X'd off? How do you think this would go down, guys? And how nervous are you? Be honest. And I'll be taking a look in the comments below. I'll get back to you guys. This review is super long. Wow, 30 minutes. That's crazy. I appreciate the support, guys. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. And if you want to do more even to support this channel, consider donating on Patreon. Link below. You'll get access to my reactions up to a week early on there, as well as other cool benefits depending on the tier you pick. We have ranges as low as $1 a month on there. So you can take a look. You can decide what's best for you. and it would be much appreciated, guys. I'll catch you next time.